What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Free Heel Life YouTube live stream, and where we preserve, protect, and promote telemark skiing. And we're gonna do a little 30-minute get together, talk a little bit about some frequently asked questions that I started doing on the podcast this week. And let me just check a couple things. Awesome. Well, always look forward to doing these. We do them the first Tuesday of the month for all our YouTube followers. If you don't already like and subscribe to the channel, please do so. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. I will just mention that I do a black level live stream that's an hour long at the end of the month. And that's been really fun. I've been able to kind of do some deep dive on some different topics and really get into just some more detail on product and history. I think I've done one on kind of the history of boots, Telemark boots and whatnot, and that's been really fun. I always enjoy doing them. Today, though, I wanted to kind of do a continuation. We get lots of DMs, emails, phone calls, voicemails, YouTube comments, Instagram comments, all talking about Telemark, and, you know, ranges from gear questions to history questions to all sorts of stuff. So the podcast on Monday that I dropped, you can go check that out, Free Heel Life Podcast. It's on any platform that you may want to listen to your podcast if you like the audio version. And I've also got the video version now on the YouTube channel. It comes out every Monday, about 185 episodes into this, and it's been a lot of fun. I always really enjoyed doing them. I was just going to kind of recap a couple of the questions in case you do want to go listen to the podcast. Just talk a little bit about a couple of the questions that I did cover on Monday. Things like this. I'm looking to get into telemark skiing. What type of ski should I use for my first setup? Super common question. Second one was, I'm putting my first telemark setup together. Should I focus where I spend my money on skis, boots, or bindings? What is the most important thing to think of? Talk a little bit about Scarpa mid-strap replacements, how many times you can mount your skis, and all sorts of good stuff. So be sure to go check out the podcast from Monday if you're interested in maybe getting some of those answers to those questions. And I preface that as well as this, that, you know, some of these, if you've been telemarketing for a long time, maybe you already know the answers. I definitely have covered a lot of these in podcasts over the years. Really what this was all about is just kind of taking the most common questions, sort of putting them in one place, letting you be able to kind of, you know, let your brain go a little bit. Maybe it's something you knew about, maybe it's not. And that's my hope. So before we get into the meat of today, just want to mention, if you are in Salt Lake, you want to come by the shop, we're appointment only Monday through Friday right now. Saturdays, we're wide open 9 to 5 with appointments available as well if you need more attention for like a boot mold, boot fitting, and definitely want to have more one-on-one time for that type of stuff. Also, if you're outside of the state of Utah, you're not coming here, you need some attention, and maybe you have a really specific telemark question that's maybe about a product that we have, you can do a consultation call for 30 minutes. We charge $25. You can give us a call. You can use that towards your purchase within 30 days. If it's a product that I don't carry, more than happy to study up on it. I've done that for a couple people so far, and happy to do that as well. In case it's, you know, a ski that we don't, obviously we only carry our own skis now. So if it's something outside of what we have in-house. Happy to answer those questions, and that's been really good. People have been very pleased with that. I did one the other day, boot fit question. Gentleman lived in Jackson Hole and was having some really bad issues with his boots, and we were able to talk through it for about 30 minutes, sort of suss it out. It wasn't a pair that he bought from us, but I was happy to kind of go through it, and I think we came up with some good solutions, and I'm going to do a follow-up call with him to make sure he found what he needed. In that particular case, I think he was in a size too small. He just got fit improperly, unfortunately, and it was crushing his feet. So anyways, I just wanted to share a little bit about that because it has been really fun connecting with people about that stuff and being able to answer those questions and be able to give that one-on-one experience to people. Obviously, YouTube's got plenty of free videos as well if you guys want to check those out. And if you want to become a member and you want to preserve or support our mission of preserve, protect, and promote telemark skiing, that's a great way to do it. There's green level, blue level, black level. Like I said, I do a black level members live once a month, and then I do specific videos for each membership level, some behind the scenes stuff that's going on here, as well as some additional videos. So be sure to check that out. So let's kind of hop into this. I wanted to kind of continue talking a little bit about some of the questions I couldn't get to over on the podcast. And hopefully these will be helpful to you. So feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you have additional questions you want me to add, maybe to a mailbox episode or the like on the podcast, I'm always looking for those questions because I want to hear what you're thinking about out there, what you're experiencing, and maybe you just cannot find the answer and you need some additional help or an opinion, depending on what it is. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I'm upgrading my Telemark gear after 20 years. Where do I even begin? This is, even after 8 years in business of doing the retail thing, having this space for people to come to, this is a very, very common question. A lot of people haven't upgraded their gear in a long time. It's totally fine. If you're only skiing 10, 15, 20 days a year, your gear is going to last quite a long time. And so some people that don't live on the internet like me, you may not know what's going on. You may not, you knew what you had. It's worked for this amount of time and you're ready to kind of jump into the next phase, probably because your stuff's worn out. Maybe you just have a little extra money you want to spend and you want to find a way to upgrade your equipment and increase the enjoyment factor on the hill. But some of the questions I always ask people right off the bat is, what are your objectives in terms of upgrading the gear? Are you a backcountry exclusive skier? Are you skiing in the resort? Is it a combo of both? What are you using it for? Even within that, sometimes we're finding, I'll have someone come in or call or whatever it may be, and they're saying, hey, I want a Telemark setup for touring, but even that word touring, we want to kind of break down a little bit because you live out in Utah and you say the word touring, generally speaking, you're talking about big mountains, putting on skins and, setting switchbacks up a backcountry area and going backcountry skiing. To other people, backcountry or the word touring might mean more rolling hills. We have a canyon here that I always think of. I always ask people this question too, because depending on kind of the feel of the situation, they may want to just go up Mill Creek Canyon, just up from the shop and walk the dog past the snow gate. And to them, they're using the word touring, but they may want a different type of setup, obviously, than someone who's has some big backcountry objectives. So kind of on that first question, I always break it down, kind of the 70-30 rules, what we've always used around here. Are you looking to do 70% backcountry, 30% in the resort, or flip-flop that? Are you 70% in the resort and 30% in the backcountry? That's definitely going to affect what type of gear I want to lead you into, talk to you about, and see if it's going to help. Some stuff crosses over better than others. Some's maybe overkill if you're skiing the resort a lot more. Other questions I'm going to ask is, maybe you want to stick with 75 millimeter depending on the situation. If you're coming, NTN boots, new Telemark norm did not exist 20 years ago. So likely you're on a 75 millimeter platform. And what we want to do is kind of figure out where to go from there. Let me start with those two little subsets of the questions. I gave the 70-30 rule on the backcountry resort combo. Let's talk about 22 Designs bindings, which is what we deal with a lot. So if you're 70% in the resort, 30% in the backcountry, it's Outlaw X all day long. It's got a great tour mode, easy to step in. The tourability is great for someone who's 30% in the backcountry or even more, depending on what kind of setup you want. That's basically where you kind of want to start out with that. If flip-flop that the other way, like we talked about, 70% in the backcountry, maybe you're starting to think of a tech toe binding, like Lynx, and or any tech toe offering that's out there. That tech toe's obviously super free pivot. I wouldn't even call it free pivot. I mean, you're basically pivoting on the toe when you're touring up, so there's no resistance in the binding, and it's excellent. I really enjoy that from when I'm tromping around in the backcountry. And, sometimes I'll ski, for that 30%, if I'm skiing in the resort, if I'm that type of person, tech toe is going to be totally fine. If you're just buying one binding, that's a good route to go. As far as upgrading your gear from 75 millimeter, that sort of second subset question, a lot of times retail places that you're going to go, they may just say, hey, here's the TX Pro, here's the TX Comp, here's an NTN boot. And I think what happens is if you're jumping 20 years in technology and you're just getting pushed into the latest thing, that's not always the best solution. So that's one thing I always talk about with people too, is try to assess things out a little bit about what their setup is. Try to familiarize myself with what binding they're on that they've had for 20 years, what boot they're on, what ski they're on. I talked about this in the podcast. I mean, boots, for me, boots are number one. So getting you a good pair of boots, making sure that they fit well, they're sized correctly, and they're going to work for what you need. Someone that's coming from the most common example I'm thinking of right now is you started in the early 2000s telemark skiing. You've probably got a K2 setup, like a K2 ski, like a World Piste or a Piste Stinks, sort of that era of telemark skis. It's maybe 75 underfoot, not super wide. It might have a G3 Targa binding on it or some type of a cable binding that's neutral in the pivot point. And you might have a two-buckle T2. Well, a lot of times I'll find out where you're going to ski, what type of skiing you're going to do. And then even this year, I've pointed a couple of people into the T2 Eco, for instance, which is going to be less dramatic. I'm going to get them on a good 75 millimeter binding, but I'm going to give them a boot that's not going to overwhelm them. A T2 Eco, for instance, has like 3 buckles, heat moldable liner. It's slick, but it's still pretty. It's like a 90 rating in terms of the flex. It's not super stiff, because what we don't want to do is jump too dramatically from 20 years ago. And just to achieve new equipment doesn't necessarily, we want to make sure you're having a good time when you go out there. And you want to make sure if you're going to make the jump from like this setup I talked about, G3 Targa, T2 two-buckle boot, and a World Piste, and you jump all the way to like NTN, TX Pro, Outlaw binding, and a fat ski, that might be overkill. Could you grow into it, so to speak? Absolutely. That'll definitely work. But if you're someone, and I see this sometimes with older customers too, they might not want to change a whole lot. They want a really good experience to continue. They actually like their old gear and they just want something new. And they're going to get a couple features out of it. One of the things I was going to bring up too, if you're coming from early mid 2000s boot and binding combo, you may not even have a free pivot tour mode. So bindings like the 01, the switchback, these bindings actually allow you to disengage the springs and have a free pivot on a 75 millimeter binding. A lot of times, that's why I like the axle binding so much, is basically if you're coming from, hey, I want to be able to tour a little bit, you've got a free pivot tour mode on that. But what it's going to do also is you've got the slick pin, and you guys can watch some videos on the YouTube channel about that, but you can change the pivot point on the axle. And what I like about that is it actually gives you the ability to have a neutral feel, like position 1 on an axle that's going to be similar to a G3 Targa, but you're going to be sort of able to adjust that pivot point to a more aggressive position like position 3. And what that lines you up for is if you are going to move into NTN, at least all the offerings on the planet right now are fairly active bindings, meaning the pivot point is further back from the toe. So these are questions that are super valid and happen all the time. Is if you're going to upgrade, let's try to figure out how to not change the Telemark experience too much where you're not getting benefit from it. It's not making your life easier. We don't want to lose the enjoyment that you're having. Because like I said, a lot of people just want to upgrade gear, but they don't necessarily dislike the current gear that they're on, even if it's old. So that's something I kind of wanted to bring up. And the last thing I was going to say is I talked a lot about NTN, new Telemark norm, which is not new anymore. I always say that we need to change that. Probably not a good idea to put new in the title of a product because at some point it's not new anymore. But a lot of people don't even know what NTN is, even though it's been around since 2008, because it's a different way to fasten to your boot to the ski. A lot of people aren't very aware of that. So that's one thing I always like to bring up. Hey, have you seen this? Do you know what this is? And then like tech toe to them is mind blowing because they're like, okay, wait, so I'm on this like a Targa, no tour mode. You just toured because you had a free heel. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, you've got these metal holes on the front of your boot and these little pins are going to go in it. And that's going to let you tour on it. I mean, it's kind of funny because for people like us a lot of us have been around this for a long time, it's familiar to us. But maybe you're listening out there tonight and you don't realize that this stuff exists. So that kind of covers that one. Let's talk about the width of boots, because this is a really common one that I don't think a lot of people, they think they know because what they had in the past, and they just assume that it's going to be the same in the present. So the best example of this is if we're talking about Telemark ski boots. So the last, or the width of the boot, is a really important factor for a lot of people because you want to make sure that especially if you have a wide foot, you've got a wider boot. Narrow foot. The difficulty in the market right now is there's not a lot of boots. It makes it easy to sell them because there's not a lot of options, but there's not a lot of options in terms of width and last. So biggest misconception, and this goes even back to people upgrading after 20 years or even a couple years. Scarpa traditionally in the 75 millimeter platform, like T-Race, T1, women's T1, these boots were 100 millimeter last. So the width of the boot. And in that era, I mean, we're talking, let's say 2000 up to like 2015, 16. The traditional way of thinking of it is Scarpa is a narrow boot. And then before Scott came along, who bought Garmont was the wide boot. So people that had Energies, Synergies, these boots were typically wide, like a 102 102, 103 last. So it had 3 millimeters. Now I'm thinking, at least I think it was 102, 103. We'll say within a millimeter. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But the Garmont boot was typically wide. Scarpa was typically skinny. So now, let's say you're moving into a Scarpa boot modern times, quote unquote modern times. There hasn't been a new boot for a long time. So they are the widest boot. So a 102 last is what you're going to find in the Scarpa TX Pro, the TX Comp, and the T2 Eco. I think actually every boot, probably T4 as well. So we're talking a 102 last, a wide boot. So if you had Scarpa because you had a narrow boot, Scarpa is now the quote unquote wide boot. Crispy generally, I think, is around closer to like 101 last or something like that. Same with the Scott boots, closer to 100, give or take a millimeter. But you're starting to see less and less Scott boots. Highly likely that they're not going to make those anymore when they run out of stock. I mean, that's the end of that one as far as I can tell. So you basically have Crispy, I guess, could be the narrow boot, and Scarpa's the wide boot. Honestly, most people fit Scarpa great. That 102 last, I feel like, is a great catch-all for most people. Like I said, it's not like an Alpine boot fit where you've got all these boots to choose from and these lasts and everything's different. Scarpa, if I had to choose one boot that's going to fit the majority of people, it's that 102 last in the TX Pro, TX Comp, T2 Eco. And that's a great way to go. Kind of plays into our upgrade question that I was talking about before. So, and I do talk about it in the podcast about half and whole size. You can check that out in the podcast and kind of get a feel for that. But that is a very common question about the width of the boots, and a lot of people not knowing that Scarpa is the widest boot on the market right now. I talked a little bit Outlaw Lynx. I was going to do this as a separate question, but again, Outlaw versus Lynx, really common question because people are looking at 22 designs and moving into that from axle, vice, hammerhead. And so they want to get that binding, and they're like wondering which one, tech toe versus what we call a cage toe, like the Outlaw X. Again, use that 70-30 rule. I think that's the best way to do it. If the majority of your time is in the backcountry, go with the tech toe. It's great. It's going to ski great in the resort. I just posted something on the YouTube, a short of me skiing groomers. I'm on Lynx. You know, it works fine. Those pins actually hold really well and actually don't have any slop in them, so they're super nice. Outlaw, I'd say, is the go-to for the majority of people. You know, if you're only going to tour a couple times a year, you're not going to notice the difference. Of course, if you can buy both bindings, all of these questions are obsolete because you're just going to buy all this stuff and have all the options. But for the people that are buying one thing, that's a good way to do it, is look at how much time in the resort versus the backcountry. You know, most of the growth in Telemark right now is happening inbounds. I think that's where we're going to see most of the growth in the future. And cage toe bindings just make a lot of sense. They're less expensive to make, so that barrier to entry is a little bit less, you know, maybe $100, $200. But, you know, performance of Outlaw X in terms of like a cage toe binding, I think that's sort of the standard at this point. Okay, so next question is it important that I get my boots molded before I go ski them? I don't want them too comfy out of the box. So I'm going to tell you my personal experience. I generally do every couple of years, I'll take a new boot out. And I hate to admit it, but more times than not, never molded them. And it is just a suffer fest for me because I can't even make it like a half a run. So heat molding a boot is actually really great to do. Get properly fit. Make sure you're in the right size. Like I was bringing up the consultation calls. I think that's what happened to him is he got fit probably by an Alpine boot fitter. Not to throw any Alpine boot fitters under the bus. some of them know Telemark really well, but I know we've done training with some local ones before, and this is something that's kind of common that I've seen over the years is you get too small of a boot. It works great when you're making alpine turns and absolutely destroys your feet when you try to drop a knee. So you don't want to go too small, but the right sized boot, heat molding that liner is money. It really, really does make a difference unless you're someone who maybe you've got a little extra space and you just kind of want to beat out that liner naturally as you're skiing. That is an option. You don't have to mold boots. But generally speaking, when we size people for boots right now, people come in and they get sized. Generally, the right size, the correct size for them, they'll tell us is not the right boot when you put it on their foot because it's just too tight. Okay? So that's something really interesting to keep in mind. They'll usually try the size up and they'll be like, this is the one. And it's not the one. It's just that it's comfortable because it's too big and the other one needs to be molded that's the correct size. So make sure you're sizing correct. I talk in the podcast about Mondo sizing and what that is, how you can measure your foot, kind of get ballpark. We've got some great videos on the YouTube channel about how to size from home. Kind of help yourself with that. Get your boots molded. It's nice and comfy. Also keeps your feet warm too because generally better circulation because it's fit around your foot. You got more room in the toe box. Let's see. Second to last question, maybe. Let's see. Talking about the features of NTN bindings, there's always questions about releasability, how they're different from 75 millimeters, spring tension options, etc. NTN in general, more options for spring variability, preload on the springs. The only real difference is it's the type of boot and how you fasten to the ski. And obviously, again, we want to try and get something that works well for you coming from whatever you're coming from. If you're new to Telemark, great place to start. Releasability, incredibly important topic because it's always been around Telemark. Binding companies forever have been trying to find releasability back to the Voile CRB, the Rotofella TRP, the Telebris. I mean, there's all sorts of releasable types of bindings that have come along in the history of Telemark. Many have not survived. Most of them have not survived. So currently on the market, if you're talking like actual releasability, Majo's probably the best one. It's got releasability separate from the tension on the spring box. That's a releasable binding. Rotofella Freeride and Freedom, releasable bindings. Outlaw X, the verbiage has always been it can release. Honestly, there's not a lot of movable parts that are, I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but every time I've looked at that since it came out, could it release? Probably if you're in a catastrophic fall. Does it really have the features on there that are specific? I don't think they're claiming that. I would not call that a releasable binding in the way that I'm categorizing these other bindings. Could it release? Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, releasability is always a little bit tricky with that. Last thing, and then I'm going to sign off for the night, is talking about mount position on skis. Where do you mount the skis? Telemarkers are renowned, balance point. We've had pins on center back in the day, and there's all these different ways of doing it. If you are knowledgeable enough that you can take a ski, don't look at any of the lines on the ski, and you want to come up with the best place to mount for you, go for it. You should always mount your skis where you want to. Now, the majority of people generally are going to walk into a shop like us, and they're going to say, hey, where do I mount my Telemark skis? Most people are going to be on the boot recommended center line that they've dictated on the ski. That's where the best skiing is. You may be thinking, well, that's for alpine skiing. Honestly, it works great for Telemark too. And we've seen that over the course of 8 years. The way we suggest boot center on recommended line on the ski is, for the majority of people, a great place. Okay. Now, sometimes I do like to, depending on that recommended line, most of them are set in a way where you can go back a little bit. I know some instructions on like 22 Designs binding says -2. I don't know where they came up with that because it's always the ski that should dictate where you mount, not the binding where you mount. Maybe if you want very directional traditional feel, -2 is good. Maybe you have a really large foot on not a long ski, and those are some nuances that can be taken into consideration about where to mount. But the general answer, you can pretty much mount skis on the recommended line in most cases, okay? And if it's not us mounting them, hopefully, obviously, we'll walk you through it and give our opinion on it. If you're going to another shop and they're not familiar with it, that's a good default to go to. So those are some of the additional frequently asked questions of 2023 about telemark skiing. Hopefully that was helpful. If you want to know more about what I talked about on Monday, go check out the podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave a review on either Spotify or iTunes. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out our membership options if you'd like to get membership videos, and I will see those Black Level members at the end of the month, and really looking forward to that. So hope you're all having a great week out there, doing some skiing, and until next week, spread Telemark always. See you later.